Thanks, everyone. What you didn't hear there in the introduction is that run down the circ was with a shocking lack of talent. I shouldn't have been there to begin with, so it was quite impressive just to survive it. So thanks for joining us. I know there are a lot of exciting presentations going on concurrently, and for you to be here with us, it means a lot to us. So thanks for being here. So my job is to introduce a topic, provide a little bit of context, and then to, as quickly as possible, turn it over to the folks you actually came to see. So I'm going to try to do that with some pace. Before I do that, though, there was a presentation this morning at 11 o'clock in the Silverado room on a set of tools, and there was a demo. Can I get a show of hands of who was at that presentation? Less than half? Okay. You didn't have to be there, but what we're talking about today is the why behind that, the pedagogy, and the findings. So that was the demo, and here's some of the other information that makes it a more complete story. By the way, there's another session on that same topic tomorrow at 4 o'clock in a room I can't remember. Silverado 1 again tomorrow, if you haven't gotten enough by the second session on this. So I'm going to start a big picture before we get into the actual tools and the data. And I think the best way to introduce that is by this little anecdote. I was in the airport yesterday and I saw a gentleman wearing a shirt that read, "Data is the new bacon." And it's only mildly funny. However, for us, in education, I mean, that's so true, right? It's all we're talking about these days. I'm sure a lot of the presentations that are going on this week are about data and data analytics, and those are worthy conversations. But the data is not the why. That's the means to the end. The end is different, and it's a little bit more human. It's what we're all here for. And when I say we in this next sentence, I'm not talking about the three of us. I'm talking about this entire room. Because if you're in education, certainly on the academic side, you have this as part of your ethos. You are curious. You have committed your life to learning, not just the students on campus, but you yourself probably embrace that concept in some way. You want to make something better. You want to learn something you didn't know before. And whether you go through it in 5 minutes in your head and you don't put terms to it, or it takes a full-blown project in 3 years and it's the scientific method, the process is largely the same. You have assumptions or a hypothesis in your head. You need to figure out how to validate it, how to measure it, how to test it. And based on that data, you are going to do some analysis and try to figure out if you were right or wrong. And if you're right, that's learning. And you want to put that in practice in some way to make some change. It could be in teaching or learning, could impact students, or it could impact administrators, who knows. But that's what we do, and that's what we do all the time. And if you were wrong, by the way, if your hypothesis was proven untrue, then you go get a new hypothesis and keep working on that. So that's the why. And at the University of California, we invest in certain technologies to allow us to expose some of those unknowns. And the one that we're focused on today, and the one that we talk a lot about internally, is online pedagogy. Okay, well, I think we all know what those terms are, but how does it differ from traditional on-ground courses or flipped, hybrid, MOOCs? Does it differ? Yeah, it does. How does it differ? I don't have that answer. I may know a little bit. You guys probably know plenty. But that was the point of this project, is to get access to data that could expose a little bit more of what we didn't know before and challenge some of Greg's assumptions and hypotheses and learn more about how students are interacting. And with modern technology available to us and stuff coming out all the time, it's an exciting time. And we have the ability to see deeply into the teaching and learning paradigm, more so than we've ever had the ability to do before. And so that's why we do it. Now, how we did it? Well, it took funding, a funding vehicle, and you heard during the introduction, I work for the Office of the President. I'm not on a campus, but we do have a funding mechanism at the Office of the President. It's called the Innovative Learning Technology Initiative. Scott's part of that as well. And so we represent funding, but we needed someone with an idea. We needed to engage with faculty that are forward-thinking. not just about their own domain, about online pedagogy. We needed someone curious, someone that was going to drive that initiative forward, someone like Greg Niemeyer. And so Greg wrote the proposal. Scott and I and others reviewed it, approved it, and then we had two legs of this wobbly stool. We still needed a third. And the third came in the form of a development team, and that is the Educational Technology Services Group, ETS, over at Berkeley. Terrific development team, and they were a critical third piece to get this done. Together, we built and deployed a suite of tools that allowed us to access data that was not available to us before. Some that we could just use ourselves, but a lot of it, and I won't steal Greg's thunder here, but a lot of it given back to the students. And you'll hear more about that in just a minute. And that was deployed this past spring, and we now have the results of that. But to hear more about what those tools were and kind of the why behind it, I'm going to turn it over to someone I'm privileged to work with every day, Scott Fries, who manages our instructional design team.
Thanks, Mike. And for the benefit of those who weren't at the 11 o'clock presentation, I want to go through a few details about what the Engagement Index is. It's a tool that's built. It's built on the LTI framework, and it's built on the notion of reciprocal validation. So what does that mean? In the context of this course, it means that you and I both benefit. Me as a student, you as a student. We both benefit when I engage with artifacts that you submit to the course. So it could be an assignment, could be a discussion. I get some points, you get some points. If I choose not to like your work, I lose a point, you lose a point. The Engagement Index, as it's manifest in Greg's course, consists of three pieces. So there's a gallery, there is a points configurator, and there's a leaderboard. The course itself is organized into main themes, units called missions. And there's 15 missions in Greg's course. And each mission differs a little bit, but the core of all the missions is a discussion prompt and some sort of project assignment that you need to submit. Now, in a regular course, you submit it through, in Canvas, you submit it as an assignment, and it goes to the instructor's inbox, it goes to SpeedGrader, what have you, and it sits there for the instructor. In this course, it goes to the gallery, and it's there for public consumption. Now, let me caveat that by saying students need to opt into this. So for FERPA considerations, everyone has to come in and say, yes, I want to publicly display my work. If you check that, you get this view. Otherwise, your work is private to all but the instructor. So I submit the work, and as I mentioned, there are a number of different actions that I can take as the creator as well as the consumer in the course. So here's the way, and this is, if you were there at 11 o'clock, you learned that this is highly configurable. There are a series of activities and behaviors that are assigned to students and points. So you get 20 points for submitting an artifact to an assignment. You get a point for liking. You lose a point for disliking someone's work. That person also loses a point. You make a comment in a discussion, 5 points. The person whose work you're discussing or commenting on gets 3 points. And as an aside, if you all got that, you guys get a point. And then the third component is the leaderboard. So as we go through, we as students go through the semester, we're responding to prompts, we're responding to one another, we're building a body of content for the course, we're building meaning into that content. Our actions, our decisions, reflect back in the leaderboard. And this is a reflection of both active participation, so work that I submit, comments that I log, likes and dislikes that I log, as well as passive, when I receive a like or a dislike or comment on my work. So that's the nuts and bolts, how we took this Engagement Index tool and applied it to Greg's course. Greg's now going to go deep into the content, the missions, and most importantly, the findings, what he learned from his students.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Scott. So the course was called Data Arts, and it was about engaging students in the question of how to present data visually and through sound and other ways, because data is very, very important to us, but oftentimes it's not as exciting as, say, a movie or a story. And so part of the point of the course was to make data exciting. And the first thing I told our students was, well, we have an engagement index. The engagement index is going to describe you to yourself, and it's going to describe your community to yourself. And so the first mission of the course was to think about the engagement index, to discuss what kind of points would be fair and unfair. And so like that, we got a lot of buy-in from our students so that they realized that the engagement index was really about them. So one example mission here was about diffusion. And the concept of diffusion is that it takes time for data to come from a source to a receiver. And sometimes whether or not you know something is very, very important. And the example that we used here is the Emancipation Proclamation. And we started looking at how the Emancipation Proclamation took 2 years to diffuse from its origin in Washington, D.C., all the way to Texas. And the Emancipation Proclamation, of course, was a matter of life and death or freedom to enslaved people at the time. And it was really important for that information to reach the enslaved people. And the students often had no idea about this. And when they engaged with it, they responded aesthetically. And one of the students made a movie here that that was done in an application called NewHive. And in our current version of the tool, it's actually possible to draw a movie like that and upload it without ever leaving Canvas. So that's a very exciting part of the asset library. And what's that other tool called again? The whiteboard, yeah. So you could now do this on the whiteboard. I'm just going to let this play out. The student took a day to do this, and the student received 20 points for this work. And what happened afterwards, this loops, what happened afterwards is she posted it, and she got 66 points total because she got 22 comments on it. So her initial score of 20 points went up by 46 points because so many people commented and +1'd this beautiful piece of work. So the comments often are one-line comments, sometimes two-line comments, sometimes there's a dialogue that emerges. And in our current version of the tool, you can now reply to people's comments specifically, and you can even +1 a comment, so there's more points to be gathered by validating what people say about each other as well. What we found, and I'm very excited to present, this is the very first time that I get to show this in public, and we just were finished with the analysis of this data, and we're sharing the data of the entire course with anybody who's interested. Of course, it's anonymized, and so the names you will see are all fake, but they are generated by real students. So this is an overview of all the courses, of all the activities that the students did during the course, so from January to the end of May. And do you see the gray lines? Are they washed out? There should be a dozen gray lines, or like 38 gray lines here, but we just highlighted 3 of them. One of them was a person that we call Eddie, and she started right at the first day of the course, and she did really, really well. She got the highest score. And then Gisela, interestingly, started halfway through February, in the first week of February, and basically a month late, and she caught up to Eddie. Now, Eddie did a huge effort at the very beginning, and then towards the end, she sort of petered out a little bit. But Gisela consistently climbed in this structure. And Abigail, on the other hand, she started at the same time as Eddie. She didn't do so well. She sort of forgot about the course halfway through and didn't really achieve many points. But this model this data tells us a lot about how people engage and how they work with each other. And of course, this data is very valuable because it tells you how what their rate of learning is, what their rate of absorbing new content is, what their rate of interaction is. And this is a very important factor. And of course, companies who might want to hire these people would like to see this data. But of course, the main point is to make the data available to the students themselves so they can see their own performance reflected and they can learn from their own performance and perhaps modify it or lean into it or build on their past experiences. So that's a total overview. And we were interested, does the engagement index correlate to the exam? So we had a final exam, and you see here the exam scores, and you can see here the engagement index went up to 2,400, and it turns out there was absolutely no correlation between the exam scores and the engagement index. And at first I was disappointed. I was like, oh, I thought the engagement index would tell me so much about how well people are doing in the exam. But then I realized, wait a minute, this is very interesting. We're measuring something completely different than the exam ever measured. And that's the point that Mike and Scott were making, which is that if we look at new opportunities in education, we also have new opportunities to understand what learning might mean. And we can capture a whole different kind of learning and then adjust our tools and our teaching towards completely new experiences. So we dug deeper into this and we wanted to know, is there a correlation between exam points and the kind of points you get for just posting a mission, or posting an assignment, or answering a question that the instructor is asking? And it turns out, again, there was no correlation at all. So the good students that do everything on time are not the ones that did really well in the exam. That's not the case. We wondered, are the people who are particularly socially active, commenting on each other's work and so forth, were they the ones who did predictably had predictable outcomes in the final exam? Again, there was no correlation whatsoever. So this engagement is completely separate from the engagement index, from the traditional way of assessing something with a grade. However, we did find a very strong correlation between social points and mission points. That means that the people who were socially engaged also did really well in submitting missions on time and being on top of it. Of course, one factor is timing, right? And anybody who's been spending time on the internet, you know exactly, the first one to post something often gets the most replies because that's the first thing anybody sees. So the first one to answer a mission with a work of art like the one we saw would get the most points naturally because everybody goes and looks, what did the other person do? I'm going to comment on it, I'm going to be inspired by it. So there's a strong correlation between social points and mission points. Now, let's look at some individual characters. Again, these are fake names, but there's all these different types of points, and Cindy is an interesting one because she got more points from adding and from giving and receiving comments than from anything else in the course. So the bulk of her coursework was consisting of commenting on other people's work and getting comments on her work. So that's very powerful. Now here we have a different case. We have Morgan, and Morgan's a funny one because she was really active in the beginning, and then in March she forgot about the course. And then when graduation time came, she's like, oh, wait a minute, I need to do something about this course. And suddenly she managed to like 200 works of art in one day. And so I was like, wait a minute, Morgan, quote unquote, I don't think that is fair. It looks like you were cheating here, we're just clicking around. And she's like, I'm so sorry, Professor, that really wasn't the case. What I did is I realized I was falling behind on the course, and what I did is I put up 2 monitors in my dorm and had everybody like the stuff in my dorm, like the stuff that they liked, and I made a whole exhibit out of it, and it was a really exciting moment in our dorm, and everybody helped me achieve this score. And I said, you know what, that is so innovative, and that brings your whole real community into the online space in a really beautiful way. I'm going to let you pass. And so that was a good move because this person, maybe she's not the most task-oriented, but she has ideas, and she's going to go far in life. So all the power to Morgan. The main point here is that with the engagement index, we learn something about how people collaborate throughout the course of the course. And we can demonstrate this by looking at how the number of points in percentage-wise shifted from January to May. In January, most people got the points from the blue stuff. The blue stuff being when you answer a discussion that was prompted by me, or when you participate in a discussion that's prompted by me, or when you just upload an assignment. Towards the end of the course, people got an equal amount of points from social comments as they did from everything else they were doing. And so that means that they were trusting that the community was a source of validation more than I was over time. So they learned to cooperate and learned to function as a community together. And that is exactly the kind of thing that we want in a workplace. We don't want people to be specialists or experts or people who know how to answer the test every time, because guess what? By the time we're done graduating these students, the test changed anyways. The material we test people on is often obsolete 3 years after they graduate. So what we do get here is a measure of how well people absorb new content, how well they do it together, and how well they interact with each other. And that is a whole new thing that we can teach and measure and talk about and use as a driving force for innovation in education. Thank you very much. We'll stop here and we'll take some questions. And so what's next for us? Should we say that quickly? Do you want to do that part?
In terms of how to contact us and what's
Yes.
My email address is up there. If you were in the earlier session, we didn't invest in this just so Greg could have a single tool, a single set of tools in a single course. We invest in this type of stuff because and Greg feels this way as well, we want to make it more widely available. And we're iterating on the product now. You've seen a demo earlier today. That's beyond what this instance that Greg ran. So we're still going through that, and Nico and Oliver and the ETS team that I mentioned earlier are still working hard on those things. We're also having internal discussions about licensing models and things like that. It is absolutely our intent to make these tools available. I think Nico said end of July is when you're going to wrap up most of the development work. We've got internal discussions to have, but we absolutely are going to let this thing out. And so we want to hear, you can come up and see us afterwards. You can contact me after this. You can find anyone from the ETS team as well. They're probably going to take down your name or give you a card. You can give them a card because we'll run some pilots or some betas because we're still learning a lot about the tools themselves in addition to the data that it's actually measuring. So, but we will take questions now on that topic or anything you've heard today. Yeah.
So this measures responses and comments. Was there any assessment of or control for the quality of those comments?
We did not control for the quality of the comments. And that is because we see that whenever a student does something unusual, all the other students are on them. And so for example, for one assignment, a student posted an image that they didn't really create. And somebody did a reverse image lookup and said, you didn't make that image, somebody else made it, here's the link. And like I observed this, and within minutes, the person put up something else, right? Took down the original assignment and then an hour later put up something else. So they're very, very concerned about ruining their own reputation, looking silly, looking like they're cheating or coasting or something. They're really concerned. And so we build on that because we make everything transparent. That's what drives it. Yeah.
Is everything anonymous for the students when they're seeing each other's work?
No. No, they see who does what. And they also see each other in chat sessions, in video chat sessions, where they talk to each other about each other's work. So the chat sessions really help bring people closer together and engage them in each other's thinking.
There is an option to opt out for FERPA reasons, for whatever reason. In that case, the student goes dark, all the pass.
Yeah.
So the reason that has to happen, so the tools can function independently or together. In what you've just heard in Greg's course, they're all in, and there's a leaderboard that everyone can see. And that leaderboard has real names in it. Because Greg's course, what you earn in engagement points is part of your grade. Grade data, we can't share that, right? That's a FERPA issue. So we convinced Greg to allow us to put in a checkbox to let students opt out. So you do have that capability. But as part of the course, you know you're going to submit assignments, and they will be available in the gallery and not anonymized.
Right.
Or you didn't have any of those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question over there.
When you guys get questions, can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure.
Just so I can have my...
Yes.
So I find this very interesting, is what you're measuring really is interactions. But I'm curious, were you at all worried about students commenting and liking their friends and other students being left out socially? So they weren't able to get many points? Is that not a concern?
That is a concern, and it's part of the reality, and it's part of what we want to look at. But you get 15 missions, so you get 15 chances. You start learning very quickly what gets people's attention. If you go back, remember the slide with the gallery? There's certain things you'd want to click on here. I don't know. And so this idea of clickbait, right? Which one would you click on first here? This one was a very popular one for clicks, right? Because this is a strange image because somebody put a makeup on that looked like they were drawn. And so it was a very ambiguous image. This was for the topic of contradictory images. And so that's something people immediately want to click on. So you learn that very quickly, and you're like, oh, if I want to be part of the in club, I need to come up with something. And it puts them in the driver's seat and makes them in charge of their reputation. So they do. It's important that they go, and we can observe how the ratings change for specific people at specific times. And I didn't get any comments about anybody feeling left out, so it didn't seem to be a problem. So we're addressing that, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Were there any issues with the dislikes? Did you actually have people dislike instead of a negative point value for the person who did it?
That was bad. Dislikes were bad. Were there any issues with dislikes? Yes, there were issues. Well, there were about 10 dislikes in the entire course, and most of them prompted the person to take their work down. So it's very powerful. Even though it's only 1 point, it's -1 point. It's so shameful, I guess, that people said, okay, I did something wrong here and I'm going to take it down. And people really used it to call out other people's inconsiderate or insensitive work. Yeah.
Also about the dislikes. So someone is penalized for a dislike,
Yeah.
right? If they do a minus, if they give somebody a -1, they get a -1. So what is the purpose of a dislike?
The purpose of a dislike is to articulate dissatisfaction in a way. And it costs me something karmically to complain about something. But I have to have a threshold where I say, well, I'm going to dislike this, but it's going to cost me something as well. I'm sorry I didn't repeat that question either, but yeah. Yeah. So the question was, why were people penalized for disliking things, right? And I just think that it's fair. If you were going to be, critical of somebody, you should pay for that privilege. Yes.
How do you quality control for comments? Because you might have someone making a really thoughtful observation or suggestion on one, and somebody else is just cutting pasting. Hey, this is great. 20 times on a given slide.
Right.
So
How do we quality control for comments? Well, I think that question came up earlier, and it's a question of pure, if you put up something silly, people know who it is that put something silly up, right? Something generic, maybe. And then they will probably not go look at your work. But it's all a complex system of intricate interactions, much like in a real community. And we really can rely on that. This is what this is about, right? It's about data. It's about how does what I do affect the data about me and so forth. And I think the learning comes from that experience of, putting something powerful up and people, respond to that, or putting something weak up and people don't respond to it. But the key question here is, do I know what quality is? And I don't think so. I think for years, for decades, maybe even for centuries, we've assumed that the professor knows what is good and bad, and I don't think that's true. I think that every student and every professor knows equally much about what's good and bad, and ultimately, these students will have to work together, and they will have to judge each other and cooperate. And so it's very important to give them a voice in the assessment of quality.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Did you ask the students how they felt about this experience? And in particular, I'm interested if there were any strongly negative reactions that were constructive to the experiment.
So how did the students feel about this experiment, and did we have any negative responses? I will say there are a couple people who dropped the course. Out of 38, 2 dropped it, but I don't know why, and maybe it's because of the engagement index, but I don't have any information on it. The people who did take the course, the first mission was about the engagement index, so they knew what they were getting into, and they knew that it's a tool that allows them to see themselves and their community like a mirror. And so they owned that mirror. And that's a very important aspect of it. And I think that's why we didn't get any upsetness or rebellion. We did run a version of this earlier, and in one point we changed the point configuration mid-course, and that was very bad. People were very, very unhappy. What? I had 1,000 points and now I only have 800? And we're like, yes, there was an error in the algorithm, and they were very sorry, and that was bad. But we didn't do that this time, and so we learned from that.
So while the formal part of this is So we have to close down the formal part and vacate the room, but we love this stuff. We'd love to talk about it all day. So maybe if we can find a spot out there in the hallway somewhere, if anyone has any questions, we don't want to leave those unanswered. Also, if you're interested in pilot, beta, whatever we're going to call it, bring us a card and we'll contact you. Thanks everyone for coming.